Welcome to the Middle School Cafe podcast, where we're serving up fresh strategies and solutions for ELA teachers just like you. Join us as we explore proven methods to bridge the achievement gap and help every student reach their full potential. Whether you're a veteran teacher or just starting out, grab a cup of coffee and a notepad and let's get started. Here's your host, Carolyn Wall.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Middle School Cafe podcast. For me, spring break starts this Friday, and I am so ready. I'm not sure which is more chaotic, the end of a trimester in middle school or the end of a term at the university. Either way, I'm ready for a break. I want to start today by acknowledging something that is probably already on your mind. State testing season is coming. Whether it's a few weeks away or a month away, it's there, like a target on the calendar. And while we can't change the fact that testing happens, we can absolutely control how we approach it in our classrooms. Our tone and attitude about it matters, and students pick up on it. Of course, we want to prepare our students. We want them to walk in feeling ready. We want them to recognize the types of questions they'll see and feel confident in how to approach them. Preparation is part of our job. But preparation doesn't have to mean shifting everything into test prep mode. When we keep the focus on skills, on learning, on thinking deeply about text, that carries weight. Students are still preparing for the test, but they're doing it through real reading work. They're building the habits that actually support them, not just practicing the format, not simply learning to pass a test. So, as we head into this stretch of the year, I'm not asking myself, how do I prep my students for the state test? I'm asking, where can I tighten the skills they already have? And that's where short, complex texts come in. At mid-year, we're not introducing brand new standards. We've already taught theme, we've practiced inference, we've looked closely at author's craft. Students have discussed character motivation and point of view. They've done the work. Now it's about sharpening it. It's about moving students from, I kind of get it, to, I can explain it. Now it's about precision. It's about tightening what they already know. Sometimes this time of year, I notice that students can identify a theme, but they struggle to explain it clearly. They can find a quote, but they don't always explain how that evidence supports their thinking. That's not because they haven't been taught. It's because they need more opportunities to practice using those skills. Short texts make that work possible. Because the text is smaller, we can slow down and really focus on the thinking. We can reread with purpose. We can model what strong explanations look like. We can take one paragraph and unpack it together. The focus becomes refinement rather than introduction. And that's exactly where our attention should be. Short stories are especially useful for this kind of work. They allow students to read a complete text in a short amount of time. That means we can return to the same story multiple times, each time with a slightly different focus. Students might read once for understanding, then again to look closely at author choices, and maybe a third time to track theme or tone. Because the story is complete, students can see the full arc. They can follow how the conflict develops, identify the turning point, and analyze how details build toward the ending. And when it's time to write, they can reference the entire story rather than just one chapter. That full arc makes narrative analysis much clearer for students. A 3 to 5 page story can easily generate several days of meaningful instruction and essentially test prep if we slow down and use it intentionally. For example, with one short story, I might spend the first day simply helping students get into the story itself. We read for understanding. We talk about what's happening, what stands out, and where students might be confused. The goal that day is just making sure everyone has a solid grasp of the story. Then the next day we come back to the same text, but now we narrow the focus. Maybe we're looking closely at how the author develops the main character. Maybe we're tracking tone or noticing repeated images or phrases. Because the story is short, students can reread parts of it easily and really focus on the author's choices. And then on a third day, we might shift into writing. Not necessarily a full essay, but a strong analytical paragraph. Students make a claim about the text, pull evidence from the story, and explain what that evidence shows. By that point, they know the story well, so the writing becomes less about remembering what happened and more about explaining their thinking. And one of the biggest benefits of slowing down with a short text is that it helps students move beyond surface level reading. You've probably seen this in your own classroom. Students start responses with, "It was about," and then retell the events of the story. They summarize instead of analyze. Or they include a quote because they know they're supposed to, but they don't really explain what that quote shows. Shorter texts give us space to address that. We can reread for patterns. We can notice repeated words or images. We can track how a character's motivation changes across the story. We can ask why the author made certain choices. When the text is shorter, students can hold the whole story in their minds. That makes it easier to see connections between details. And that's really what we're building: habits of noticing. When students learn to notice patterns, question author choices, and explain their thinking clearly, they become stronger readers across the board. Students don't automatically know what that kind of thinking sounds like. When we say things like "go deeper" or "explain your thinking," many students need to actually see what that looks like in practice. They need to hear the difference between a surface level response and a thoughtful one. For example, a student might say, "The character was sad." That's not wrong, but it's only the starting point. A stronger response might explain how the author shows that sadness through the character's silence, their actions, or the way other characters respond to them. Short texts give us the space to model that kind of thinking. We can take a response and revise it together. We can ask, how could we make this stronger? We can help students move from naming something in the text to explaining what it means. There's another reason I lean into short texts this time of year, and that has to do with access. I'm a big fan of novels in the classroom. Longer texts help students build stamina and experience what it means to stay with a story over time. But when we're trying to refine analytical skills, shorter texts can give us the space to slow down and focus closely on the thinking. Short texts reduce the cognitive overload. Students can hold the entire story in their minds, which makes it easier to track ideas, notice patterns, and connect details. They also make rereading possible, and normalizing rereading is one of the most powerful comprehension tools we can give students. Short texts are especially helpful for multilingual learners who benefit from encountering the same language multiple times. They also support struggling readers who might feel overwhelmed by longer passages but are fully capable of doing the analytical work once the length barrier is removed. And from a practical standpoint, short texts make small group analysis easier to manage. Students can read, discuss, and revisit the same passage within a single lesson. This is also the time of year when some students start to lose momentum. They're tired, the year feels long, and testing season is on the horizon. Short, complex texts give us a way to keep students engaged in meaningful work. They allow students to practice deep thinking without feeling overwhelmed by the length of the text. Now, I want to be very clear. This episode is not about test prep. I've never been a big proponent of heavy test prep in the classroom. I'm not a fan of weeks of practice packets or drilling specific question types over and over right before the test. When I was in the classroom, I actually talked about the test itself very minimally. Of course, as the test got closer, I acknowledged that it was coming. I used the practice tests that came with our state assessment, and students became familiar with the format. That's just part of preparing them for the test. But I also know that this time of year can make teachers feel pulled in a lot of directions. There can be pressure to focus on scores, pressure to move faster, pressure to make everything look like the test. But strong reading instruction is still strong reading instruction in March and April. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do for students is not add drill and kill practice sheets. It's to help them really understand what they are being asked to do as readers. Because when students understand how to think about a text, when they know how to analyze, explain their reasoning, and support their ideas with evidence, those skills transfer anywhere. And honestly, that mattered more to me than chasing a single score on a state assessment. I never wanted my students to associate reading skills with passing a test. As testing season approaches, it can be tempting to panic a little or shift everything into test prep mode. But remember this: you've been building readers all year. You've been teaching students how to identify theme, how to make inferences, how to think about author's craft. Those skills didn't appear overnight, and they don't disappear just because a test is coming. This time of year is really about tightening what students already know, moving them toward mastery of skills. Short stories and other short, complex texts give us a powerful way to do that. They allow students to revisit skills, refine their thinking, and practice explaining their ideas with evidence. So keep the focus where it belongs. Keep the focus on learning. Keep the focus on thinking. Keep the focus on the skills that help students become stronger readers. When students know how to think critically about a text, everything else tends to fall into place. Before we wrap up, I just want to offer a little encouragement. This time of year can bring a lot of pressure. There are reminders about testing, conversations about scores, and sometimes a push to shift everything toward test prep. But keep doing the work you know matters. The work you're doing in your classroom every day, helping students think about text, helping them explain their ideas, helping them grow as readers, that work is more important than a test score. If these are the kinds of conversations you enjoy, this is exactly the type of thing we talk about inside my free community, Building Strong and Confident Readers. Inside the group, we focus on helping teachers build lifelong readers and lifelong learners. It's a place where we talk about reading instruction, classroom strategies, and ways to support students as they grow. Each week, I host a live Q&A where teachers can bring their questions, and each month we have a free training focused on a specific reading topic. It's a space for practical ideas, professional conversation, and support from other teachers doing the same work. If that sounds helpful, you're always welcome to join us. I'll include the link in the show notes. It's completely free to join. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for the work you're doing every day in your classrooms. Until next time. Thanks for joining me today. As a reminder, a new episode drops every first and third Tuesday, so be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Be sure to visit middleschoolcafe.com to find links to everything mentioned in today's show. Until next time.